Hi to everyone. I'm sorry I have to talk to you from a bright early morning here in Berkeley, although it's strangely and unusually not that bright. But I would love to have been there, but somehow dragging my kids away from New Year's and the holidays was it was vetoed by my family. So we'll have to do this from afar, and next time I'll come for an in-person visit. I would actually love to. But an interesting, thank you. An interesting thing about how I make these decisions, I'm more than happy to spend some time talking about being an entrepreneur, talking about developing companies around machine learning, and then selling them in terms of AI, if you will. But I measure my work in some fairly, yikes, straightforward ways. So, for example, the flight to Tel Aviv is measured in how many families can get my company's education services free for a year. And that puts my work in fairly stark terms. It's very flattering to fly out all around the world. This January, I will do a trip to Bangkok, Singapore, and Kuala Lumpur for some really exciting work. I'll be in Beijing working with UNICEF China on how to improve education in rural China. I've just started a project with an innovation team in Dublin at Accenture to try and forecast the career trajectories of all 425,000 Accenture employees, and then identify the moments in their life when you can change that trajectory for the better. That they'll live longer, they'll be happier, and yes, they'll be more productive. But ultimately, my life is about how do we make better people? How do we make people that live longer, happier, more meaningful lives? And everything I do is in service of that. All of my companies, all of my nonprofit work, all of the AIs I invent. And it very much has an impact. It really transforms my approach to being an entrepreneur. So let me start off by throwing out this idea. And I get very different responses from very different audiences. So how many of you in the audience think right now you could get up in front of everyone? And I'm not asking you to, but genuinely, honestly, how many of you could get up and articulate your purpose, the thing right now that drives who you are and what you do? Anybody? Show of hands. That's a pretty good number. Normally when I'm speaking, let's say to courses of MBA students, I might get one hand out of the audience. And, you know, in these trips where I fly around the world, I am typically meeting people that say things like, you know, hi, I'm Akeem and I'm with Accenture. So who are you with? And I just think that is the strangest way. I frequently joke that who are you with is the mating call of the American middle manager. It's, you know, you just sort of wander around trying to sum people up based on whether they're a meaningful sort of sales networking opportunity. And yet it captures nothing about who entrepreneurship and about why innovation usually fails. But I think one of the main reasons that startups fail, that innovation fails, is that people don't have a purpose. And for me, I'm a neuroscientist by training. So most recently at UC Berkeley, this is right out my window here is UC Berkeley, at the Redwood Center for Theoretical Neuroscience. And so for me, purpose is somewhat lamely defined as construct purpose out of the psychological literature. It's something that's bigger than you, and in my opinion, something that you're willing to sacrifice for. That's actually a little bit of a heresy here in Silicon Valley. Everyone here thinks that they're doing social good with their startup. You've got a startup that steals cycle time out of unsuspecting free users of your mobile app to mine Bitcoin. You're doing social good. I don't know how they justify it, but everyone here is a social entrepreneur. Well, it's bullshit. You're doing good in the world if you're making better lives, if you're willing to sacrifice for the thing you believe in. And I find shockingly few people really meet that requirement. Let me be clear. I'm not saying companies, startups can't do good. They do, and they frequently do. I work with a lot of big companies that do good in the world. But the real question is, when you run up against a hard choice, which way do you go? Are you going to pivot? Are you going to make the choice that will make a stronger company? Or are you going to serve your purpose? And there isn't a wrong answer. Don't get me wrong. Building a company, you're behind the times by about a month. I've just started my 5th company, a little bit different than all the others. This time it's a think tank. We're exploring the future of human potential. It literally says mad science on our website. All those cool things I just mentioned are a snippet of some of the projects this new think tank is working on. And yes, we use fancy machine learning. We use tons of behavioral economics and neuroscience, but ultimately we're trying to understand how to make better people so that 20 years from now, we haven't dug ourselves into a hole we can't climb back out of, which is my big fear. So, you know, I have a PhD in psychology and in computational neuroscience. Maybe it's not surprising that I look at the world through the lens of a scientist, of a behavioral scientist. And I think if you really want to understand a company, understand its purpose. Understand the purpose of the people behind it. When the shit hits the fan and you're not getting the traction you need, are you serving your purpose? And it's not just whether you understand that, it's whether your co-founders understand that. It's whether your board understands it and your investors. In fact, one of my own companies, a company called Guild that I'm still enormously proud of, but was heading towards an IPO and ended up with not a terrible sale price, but really never reached its potential, was ultimately because of a conflict between purpose and business. Our tagline was, we take bias out of the hiring process. So I was their chief scientist. We build algorithms to predict how great people were at jobs they'd never held. And the way we were able to recruit some amazing machine learning talent and engineering talent was by having a purpose. We're making the world a better place. We're making certain that the right person gets the job. And in some of my more airy, dreamy moments, that actually boiled down to, hey, what if someone wasn't qualified, but they could be amazing? Like, could we identify people that wouldn't be the right hire today, but if you gave them an internship in 6 months, they'd be incredible? And in doing that research, I'm going to come back to this in a little bit. We found amazing things in that research, and I'm going to return to it in a moment. But about a year into it, the co-founders and I had conflicts over the direction that the company was taking. And after 2 years, I left. And one of the most flattering things I ever heard from anyone was a year after that, 3 years after I'd started, a year after I'd left, the head of HR, who started the day I left and was leaving 1 year later. She started at the Lucas Foundation as their head of HR. And she grabbed coffee with me and said, you know, I'm leaving today. I just wanted to let you know. But what I really wanted to let you know was that the last year of my life has been a long series of exit interviews. Like, everybody is leaving. And the reason that everyone said was, without Vivienne there, we don't know why we're doing what we're doing. And that was very flattering. I never really saw myself as the role model for the company, as the purpose of the company. I didn't even start the company. But I know why I took the job. I have turned down some fancy smancy jobs, offers to be chief scientist at some of the biggest companies in the world, because I didn't see how it served my purpose. It would have served my bank account wonderfully. My kids have recently figured out, they've just reached that age where they realize that we could be living up on a mansion in the Berkeley Hills, and we're not because their mom is a jackass. They're not thrilled about this, but every time I take a trip, I write a little short story for them that explains why it was more important for me to be on that trip than to be at home with them as their mom. So that they understand why I do what I do, why I found these companies, why I do the nonprofit work that I do, is because it makes the world a better place for them. I mean, I believe that in my heart. And I believed that when I took the job at Guild. And we did amazing stuff. So I'm going to take a little detour into that right now. So we built a database of 122 million people, the sort of English-speaking professional world. If you want to know where we got our data from, it's worth knowing that the first time I ever met Reid Hoffman, I introduced myself, and he said, "Oh, I know you. I don't like you." So we borrowed heavily using massive Tor server networks and an incredible cat and mouse game to liberally borrow profiles from Facebook and LinkedIn, only public data, which the Supreme Court has decided is entirely legal. We had every bit of open source code ever published on GitHub and Bitbucket, even Google Code. We pulled in blog posts, Twitter feeds, everything that people wrote off about 100 different websites. Giving some estimates from from Gallup, we had perhaps the majority of the English-speaking professional world represented in our database. And from that, we were able to build models that predicted how good you were. Like, given everything you'd ever said on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and your blog posts, how does that predict the best code written? How does that predict the best sales histories, which we were able to get a hold of also through some trickiness? How does that predict design work that you've done? So here's a quick tour. In case you didn't know it, even true today with fancy technology, when recruiters open up, they would look at your paper resume or they open up your LinkedIn profile, you get 5 seconds. They look at your name, your school, and your last job. And if your name doesn't fit the right mold, if your university doesn't have the right bona fides, if your last job isn't a brand name company, then that search is done. You don't even get a no. So imagine you're here in America, particularly here in California, and you're a young man named Jade Dominguez. And you graduate from high school, secondary school, and you don't go to college. No one in your family's ever gone to college. But you're a very entrepreneurial guy. So you start selling t-shirts, these designer t-shirts on the street. And you get them out there, and people are buying them. But you feel like you could do more. So you start a website. And, basic sort of push-button sales site, and you sell more t-shirts. And that's exciting, except now the t-shirts, and the website, like, it could be better. It could be more. So you teach yourself to program, in this case, Ruby, and you build your own site. And you sell even more t-shirts. But now you're feeling like, who cares about t-shirts? Ruby needs to be better. So you teach yourself to program even more, go deeper. And Ruby, if you don't know, is an open source language. It's debatably a little less popular than it used to be, but at the time that we were doing this work, it was probably most websites you hit were running Ruby in some fashion. And open source is sort of a bit of a made up thing. Like, really, these are controlled. These are little mafias that run their own little private fiefdoms of languages. You kind of need to be in the in. No random person is sending in pull requests and getting their new code accepted, but he did. So he starts sending in these pull requests against a language running websites around the world in which he was entirely self-trained after never going to university. And then very reasonably, he starts saying to himself, why the hell am I selling t-shirts in LA? I should go up to Silicon Valley and get a job as a software developer. So for a year, he sends his resumes up to the Valley. And I already told you what happens. They give him 5 seconds and they say, Dominguez, nothing, nothing. Wrong last name, no university, no previous job. They didn't even say no to him for a year. So you can probably imagine where this is going. He's getting pretty frustrated and feeling like giving up. And then the startup gives him a call. And we say, hey, our algorithm tells us you're the second best Ruby developer in all of Los Angeles. Can we fly you up to San Francisco to interview to be our lead front-end engineer? Now, we knew he'd never worked at a big company before because we knew every public thing about him. But we also knew that we couldn't hire the best front-end engineers in the world as determined by LinkedIn because they worked for LinkedIn, because they worked for Google and Facebook. So we took a chance. Our algorithm said he was the best, and we hired him. So about a year later, he and I were on the cover of the New York Times. And he was awesome. About the same time I left, he left, founded his own company. And I went on to found several other companies. But it's sort of the exact story of what you want. This was an amazing person who, in some sense, through no fault of his own, simply because he didn't follow the traditional path, couldn't get the jobs he was qualified for. And we ended up with tons of what we call jade stories. And that was our purpose. Our purpose was to find those people and transform their lives. We were a for-profit company, but my contention is, if you're out there to serve a purpose, your job is only that. Your secondary consideration is uber growth and, massive scale, but your primary concern is purpose. And after a little while, it became clear to me that we were headed in a different direction than that. And so we parted ways. Recently, I was recruited to be the chief scientist for people at Amazon. And if you know me and you've gotten to know me a little bit, you will appreciate the quality of this pitch. They said, in 7 years, we will be a 1 million person company. And your job will be to make their life better. So I've gotten a lot of, hey, come be our director of algorithms or our chief scientist from a lot of very fancy brand name companies. And my general line is, I'll write back and say, this will have to be another in a long line of terrible career decisions, but no, thank you. My response to Uber was simply, hell no. But that was a bit more of a moral decision. So I actually went up to Amazon and I met with everyone and I learned about it. It's an amazing company, an amazing opportunity. But the simple truth is there's only one job description at Amazon. Do what Jeff says. And I saw the exact same story that I had already experienced at Guild. For a year, it would be amazing. And then Jeff would say, hey, love what you're doing. I've got this other project I'd like you to work on. And then I would say, no. And then it would be shitty for a year, and then it would be over. And I'm comfortable with that. But what I decided is, in this crazy world where a woman in a tiny office in Berkeley, California, can reach people all around the world, I can actually better serve my purpose through my little startups than I can through Uber or Amazon or Netflix or others. partially because I've been willing to walk away from what seemed like amazing opportunities, because I have come to understand where and how I will be successful. It's not about cool data sets and machine learning. I actually get access to incredibly cool data sets all the time. All I have to do is say, does anyone need help? And people come out of the woodwork. Hey, UNICEF China, do you need help? Make-A-Wish Foundation, Big Brothers Big Sisters, Salesforce, Accenture. Everyone's got cool data to work on. I never ask whether they can pay me. I just ask whether I can help. And if we find something that makes the world a better place, I go all in. The crazy thing about that is it always works. Always. It may sound incredibly perverse. It may sound like nothing you've ever heard in an MBA class. I have friends routinely tell me to stop doing work for free. And yet, every step of the way, my life has gotten better. And let's be clear, I'm a freak. Like, my life should be misery. You don't go through gender transition with the expectation that you will be giving keynotes at White House receptions. It's worth noting that my invitations to the White House have dried up over the last year, but that's a separate issue. So, it's an incredible experience to do all of the wrong things because you believe in what you're doing, because you're willing to make sacrifices. And then it turns out they're not sacrifices. Everything works out for the best. So here's the funny thing. I'm talking about personal experience right now, but it turns out I'm not really an entrepreneur. I am a professional mad scientist who has figured out how to trick venture capitalists into giving me money. It turns out they're not very bright. They're very easy to trick. As long as you continue to giving them money back, they never really catch on. I have no interest in founding great companies. I always secretly have an experiment I want to run. I build companies to run my experiments. And no one has seemed to have caught on yet, which is cool. So we get to run these amazing experiments. So you know what some of these experiments tell me? Having a purpose is a substantial predictor, and listen in, because there's a lot of things here, of income, wealth accumulation, social network connectedness, happiness, subjective happiness, objective measures of happiness, walking speed at age 65, and 7 or 8 different biomarkers of long-term health outcomes, including some that are congenitally related. So in other words, having a purpose is prophylactic against congenital defects. Turns out I gave a TED talk about something called endogenous motivation, that drive that comes from within you. Same thing. Conscientiousness, openness, a large working memory span. So in running all of these experiments, Guild, Socos, my new think tank, many of the other companies I founded along the way, Omniscient and Conga and ShiftGig, which is an on-demand workforce company in Chicago, I get to run these crazy experiments. And again, what we find is if you want to be a better parent, be a better person. If you want to get a better job, be a better person. You want to start a more successful company, be a better person. It may sound easy for me to say this. I realize I'm not exactly giving you a pamphlet on how to be a better person. But all of these things that feel like luxuries sometimes, certainly when you look at how people operate, often in Silicon Valley or on Wall Street or in the city, I have yet to visit Tel Aviv, but I would be shocked if it's not true all over the world, is you need to make sacrifices to be successful. And it's true. But the things you sacrifice are the money. The things you sacrifice are the happiness. And that may sound counterintuitive, but I'm not just talking from personal experience. I'm talking from massive research on data sets of over 100 million people. The most successful people are the ones that possess these qualities. My wife and I wrote a review paper about them. We call it meta-learning. Roughly speaking, it's social skills, it's emotional intelligence, it's creativity, it's general cognitive ability. It's nothing shocking. But what's amazing is it doesn't matter if you know how to program. It doesn't matter if you went to the right school. It doesn't matter what the color of your skin is or your gender. The only thing that matters is if you possess these qualities. I'm not saying gender doesn't matter. I'm just saying that it turns out your gender predicts nothing about the quality of code that you write. It predicts nothing about the quality of your sales. The only things that do are these qualities. And normally I throw a slide up so you can see all of these qualities. If anyone's curious, I'm happy to share the link to the paper on this stuff. So let me shift gears a little bit. Well, you know, one of the interesting things about building these massive data sets in my work and looking at what predicts life outcomes is it also allows me to delve into a lot of classic questions. Racism, sexism, and in ways people haven't before. So, you know, we're in this new world where we get to do something called computational social science. What used to be lab experiments or intuitive ideas about the world, the way the world works, we now get to run at scale. I took that database of 122 million people and we estimated something that I call the tax on being different. So the idea here was, is there really a difference between being a man or woman in the tech industry? Is there a difference between having a last name like Dominguez or a last name like Donahue in America? And we might say all sorts of things, but it's apples and oranges. You know, supposedly women do all this stuff. They don't negotiate well enough for their salaries. Turns out that's not true. They don't network hard enough. Turns out that's not true. They don't get out there and put themselves out for opportunities. Turns out that's not true either. But hey, you can at least say that that's true and muddy the waters. And then suddenly, how do we know whether women should be paid the same as men? So I had this massive data set and a set of algorithms that equated people on their quality of work. So we were able to actually work it out. I'll spare you the whole long story and really get down to the point that we found, yeah, there were huge costs. Being a woman in the tech industry costs you about $250,000 right up front. Longer, more costly schools, longer work histories for the same outcomes, for the same quality of work. You start to add in intersectionality, being a lesbian. Oh man, it starts to really bite. Any of you out there that are female entrepreneurs? I mean, first off, there's the personal stories that I could share. Guys in the room, if you've ever gone to a VC and tries to raise money, have they ever patted you on the head and told you how nice you look? Because that's happened to me. And I gotta say, nobody said shit like that when I was a guy. But suddenly post-transition, no more math questions, no more benefit of the doubt. Everything was, oh, you should be so proud of yourself. It was all this sort of weird, sweet old uncle wants to bounce you on his knee. It was icky. But what we found is if you're a lesbian entrepreneur, right off the top, that's a 40% premium on your Series A raise. So if a guy with the exact same pitch raises 10 million, you raise 6. Now it turns out there's interesting things there. Women tend to run more efficient companies. Women tend to give slightly higher returns to their investors. Largely, this is driven by the fact not all men, but a small subset of men turn out to be assholes slightly more frequently than women. So this has been well studied. I was an advisor to Credit Suisse when we released a report on board membership. And it turns out the only thing an all-male C-suite and boardroom got you was a substantially higher likelihood of catastrophic failure, usually due to malfeasance or bad investments, bad purchases. So we have this weird world in which we're able to actually measure the cost of being different. And yes, if you're curious, there is a cost to being gay. It doesn't matter that you're, nominally white, male, all of the surface level things that should make it easy to raise money in the venture capital world. We've measured that too. It's not a huge effect, but there is a very real cost to being gay out in the world. And if you're Black and gay, if you have an accent, it makes it even more costly. So what does this actually do? So again, I get to do these cool experiments and people give me money to do it, thinking I'm going to make the money back. So I have two economists that I really love. One is named Raj Chetty. He's at Stanford, used to be at Harvard. And the other is James Heckman, who's a Nobel Prize winner at University of Chicago. Both of them have done amazing work that really influences my own look at the world. But each of them did this thing that I found really strange. They looked at data on the pay gap between men and women. And they wrote papers saying, pretty much the pay gap is because women leave to raise families. That's what the data shows. And I read the papers and their models and so forth, and I get where they're coming from. It's an accurate description of the data. It doesn't really explain why women that don't raise families also pay the tax, but is an accurate read of the data. But what I felt is it didn't explain why. Why is it that an incredibly smart young woman worked hard through school all of her life, then got an amazing job inside of a company that she worked her ass off to get, and began climbing up the junior ranks, and then suddenly it just occurred to her that she wants to raise a family? So if this is a choice that women make that is completely independent of the world around them, we'd expect essentially no difference in pay gap, in pipeline, in the tax between different companies. Or at least it would fit some noise model. So it turns out there's a way to answer this question. And it's a way that you can do building machine learning. Or if you want to sell it to a VC, you do it by building AI. By the way, total aside, AI for me means augmentative intelligence. I have no interest in building autonomous systems. I want to build better people. So what did we build? We built a system that mined through the websites of 60,000 companies and ran face recognition on their board and C-suite. Why did we do this? It wasn't out of the blue. I had a good reason for this. Turns out the single best explanatory variable of dozens and dozens of variables that we looked at for the pay gap between men and women was how many women are on the leadership team. More women on the board, more women in the C-suite, more women stick with it, raise their families without quitting their jobs, they earn more money, they go further. And you want to know why it is? I could get into the technical details of what's called belief-based utility at this point. I am an incredible geek and a total promiscuous scientist. I use machine learning, behavioral economics, sociology. I don't care where the models come from. I care that they work. So in this case, the sort of lay way of putting it is you worked hard, twice as hard as the guys around you all of your life, and then you look up and there's nobody like you on the leadership team. What's the point? Why keep working so hard? Suddenly that choice, your choice, but that choice of being a mom, that's a great choice now. Yet when you look up and you see people like you, so in fact what we saw is that it's causally true. when a woman came in and took a position as CEO, CFO, Chief Strategic Officer, Chief Business Officer, within a year, pay gap drops, the tax drops, the pipeline improves. Is it because of policies put in place? Well, it's complex. It's the whole dynamic. But what I'm getting at is you cannot solve diversity from the bottom. You have to solve it from the top. And that's a power that you guys bring to your companies right off the bat, is you bring that right in. That a little bluff there. You tell everyone that's different, that might want to come and work at your company, that they can be successful there. And you tell it simply by role modeling it. Turns out that is one of the most powerful things you can do for all of your employees, and for that matter, all of your kids. So I'm running short on time here, and I didn't even get to why it is that innovation fails, because I am a notorious rambler. Let me just put it this way. Not only is innovation hard, but the majority of even successful innovation endeavors discovers things that make the problem they were meant to solve worse. And I could give you a number of citations of what those are right now. If you're curious, write me or ask me a question about it, and I'll go into more detail. But I like to put it, and I'll close with this incredibly geeky metaphor, which I don't think is a metaphor. Any of you work with deep neural networks? You know, the arcane process of fine-tuning metaparameters and architecting your network to solve these incredibly obtuse problems. Well, there's an interesting aspect to this, which is, if you want to think of what a network is before it's trained, it's a vast desert, an empty space with almost nothing in it, except these tiny little oases where there's some structure, some mapping between inputs and outputs. And most of the way we use machine learning, AI today to solve problems is we hire some very smart, largely young men from Stanford and MIT and Weissman Institute and beyond to solve bias in workplace hiring, to improve lending in startups, to target better financial outcomes. And we give them a bunch of data, and they find these oases in the data with their deep neural networks. Turns out the vast majority of them are mirages. They're nothing. I just read a paper about how if you wanted to hire the best employees, you should hire straight white men from conservative religious backgrounds. It was a real published paper. I'm sure they found real statistical structure in their data. Believe me, that's no shock at all. But they knew nothing about their problem space. Why does most innovation fail? Because we're handing it off to people that have spent their very brief professional lives learning how to build deep neural networks, instead of people that know something about the problems they're trying to solve. Most of the toughest problems in the world, they aren't machine learning problems. In fact, it turns out none of them are. They're all human problems. They all have human solutions. I wouldn't build AI if I didn't think it helped, but it's just a tool. If you're building a company around AI, be sure you understand your market space. Don't understand it today. Understand it with 20 years of research history. Understand it with 100 years of scientific research into the market you're looking at. Because if you don't, I guarantee you will fail. You may not fail to found a great company, you will fail to solve the problem. And if you're purpose-driven, that's the only reason you're there. So I've rambled long enough. I have disappointed you enough for one day, but hopefully there's something there that's worth continuing your conversations as you slowly get wasted with all of the booze I'm sure they're pouring down your throats tonight. So thank you so much for inviting me to join you all, and I guarantee next time I will be there in person.
Let's hear it for Dr. Vivienne Ming. Vivienne, if you have just a couple more minutes for us, I'm sure we have a couple.
Happy to.
I'd like to go first. I'm sure this is going through some of the audience's minds tonight as we were listening to you talk about having a purpose and letting that lead your career choices. I'm sure a lot of us were sitting there saying, well, yeah, that's easy for her to say. She's this amazing person. She's inspiring us all. But I've got this day job. I've got kids to feed. And what can I do tomorrow to follow my purpose, to even find my purpose? So my question to you would be, if you could give us one thing that each of us or most of us could do tomorrow to go in that direction, what would that one thing be?
So I'm going to immediately not answer your question. I'm going to give you three things. I had the pleasure of giving the convocation at my alma mater, University of California at San Diego. I'm interesting because in 1990, I flunked out. I was a miserable and unhappy person. 10 years later, I returned. I did my entire undergraduate degree in a single year and got perfect scores in every class. So they invited me last year to come and tell all of the freshmen, 10,000 people in a football stadium, what I did differently. So here were my three rules. Number one, whatever you're doing today, go all in. I don't care if you don't love it. I don't care if you're looking for something else to do. Go all in. Far too many people are waiting to find that one thing that's right for them. They're spending their time wishing they were in a different life. Make the life that you're doing right now great. And if there genuinely is nothing there and you need to pay the rent, and I've been there in my life, then you need to go build this in your free time. And I know that sounds like a luxury, but if there's a problem you want to solve in the world, go solve it. Don't wait around for someone to pay you to do it. Don't wait around for a VC to give you money to do it. Solve it right now. And that isn't a command to go write open source code, but if that's the way that's a tool you have, that's great. If the tool you have is expression, go write about it. If the tool you have is activism, go organize around it. Lesson number two, there isn't one purpose that's meant for you. Just there isn't. This is very research driven. Go construct your purpose. Don't wait around for the thing you loved. Who promised you're going to love the thing that you can be great at? Go build a purpose. My purpose was born out of not killing myself in the mid-90s. My purpose was born out of a coin toss to pick which degree I would get when I went back to school. And when life gave me machine learning, which I was recommended to be a research assistant in a lab that does, it actually turns out it was just bought by Apple. All of the new face recognition technology in the new iPhone, that's from my old lab. It spun off as a startup and Apple bought them. So that was my introduction to machine learning. And when that entered my life, I owned it and I made the most of it. And then lesson number three is kind of an important one. It's just fucking die already. Be willing to walk away from what you're doing. I know that's scary. I know it sounds incredibly risky to walk away from a good thing, but I'm telling you, one, as a researcher, it is the thing that pays off. But think about how it changes how you think about the world. You're going all in right now and you feel like that's it. That means I'm committed to do this for the rest of my life. You're not. You're committed for the rest of this brief lifetime, 5 years, maybe. Then die and do something different. That's how I've led my entire life, is building something amazing and then walking away from it over and over and over again. And it gets better every single time. And my only judgment about whether you're making a good decision is, are you a better person for it? That's it. It's the only thing that matters. And I realize it's easy for me to believe my own research that this actually genuinely pays off in your life in the long run. But, you know, again, 100 million people, I bet most of you fit that pattern. If you're willing, if you have the courage to walk away from bad situations and then just go build the new ones for yourself, it genuinely pays off.
So walk away and go all in. That would be your parting words.
Yes.
Vivienne, we have more questions, but we're going to have to end here with that inspiring speech of yours. So thank you again very, very much. Dr. Vivienne Ming, everyone.